The spring winds carried the scent of wild sage across Widow's Ridge as Dawn Anderson knelt in the freshly turned earth, her tears mingling with the soil that now embraced all that remained of William Anderson. It had been 3 days since they'd laid him to rest. 3 days since typhoid had claimed the man who'd promised to build her a life in Salida, Colorado territory. The small wooden cross marking his grave stood as a stark reminder of dreams unfulfilled, much like the half-finished roof of their homestead that loomed on the horizon. Nicholas Zachary spotted the woman from half a mile away, her black mourning dress billowing in the wind as she bent over the grave site. He'd been riding for 2 days straight, pushing his paint stallion through the rugged terrain of the Colorado mountains, seeking work after the cattle drive from Texas had ended. The distant silhouette of a woman in mourning gave him pause. In the unspoken code of the frontier, a stranger's grief was to be respected from a distance. Dawn didn't notice the rider approaching until the shadow fell across her husband's grave. She looked up, squinting against the late afternoon sun to make out the tall figure atop a paint horse. Her hand instinctively went to the small derringer hidden in her pocket, William's parting gift and final instruction. "Madam," the stranger said, removing his hat and holding it respectfully against his chest. "Didn't mean to disturb your grieving." Dawn wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You're not from Salida," it wasn't a question. In a town of barely 200 souls, strangers were rare enough to be noticed. "No, madam," Nicholas Zachary, coming up from the San Luis Valley looking for work. His eyes drifted to the crude wooden cross, then back to her face. "My condolences for your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Zachary." She stood, brushing the dirt from her skirts with as much dignity as she could muster. "If you're looking for work, Salida's got little to offer these days, the railroad's bringing its own men." Nicholas nodded, his weathered face revealing nothing. Been hearing that all through Colorado territory. Still, a man's got to try. He was about to replace his hat when his gaze caught the distant homestead with its half-finished roof. "That your place?" Dawn followed his gaze, her chest tightening at the sight. It was to be. William took ill before he could finish it. Nicholas studied the structure, then the woman. Something in her composure, the way she stood tall despite the fresh grief, stirred something in him. "I'm handy with tools, madam." "If you're in need." "I have no money to pay a carpenter, Mr. Zachary," Dawn replied, her voice carrying the pride of a woman determined not to accept charity. "Wasn't looking for money." He replaced his hat. "Just a place to stable my horse for a few days before moving on." "Maybe some water from your well." Dawn hesitated. William had been gone only 3 days. What would people in town say about a strange man at her homestead? Yet winter would return to the mountains soon enough, and without a proper roof, she'd never survive. She looked back at the grave of her husband, as if seeking his counsel. "I can sleep in your barn," Nicholas added, sensing her hesitation. "No impropriety intended. We don't have a barn yet," she said softly. "Just the beginnings of a house and the lean to where I've been sleeping." Nicholas nodded slowly. "I can remedy both situations, madam, if you'll permit it." In that moment, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the cemetery of Salida, Dawn Anderson made the first of many difficult decisions she would face as a widow on the frontier. She nodded once sharply, as if afraid she might change her mind. "Dawn Anderson," she finally introduced herself. "My husband was William." "Good man, I expect," Nicholas said, glancing at the grave. "The best," she replied, and turned to lead the way home. The half-built cabin sat on 20 acres of land that William had claimed under the Homestead Act, situated 2 miles outside Salida proper. The town itself, nestled in the upper Arkansas River Valley and surrounded by towering peaks of the Continental Divide, had sprung up as a supply point for silver miners and was now growing with the promise of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. As they approached the homestead, Nicholas assessed the work that William Anderson had left unfinished. The foundation was solid and the walls were up, but the roof was merely a skeletal frame of timber with canvas stretched across one corner, barely enough to provide shelter from the elements. "He did good work," Nicholas observed, dismounting and leading his horse to the small water trough near the well. "He was a wheelwright by trade," Dawn explained, watching the stranger examine her home with expert eyes. "He learned building from his father, said he'd have us settled before winter." Nicholas nodded. "How long has he been gone?" 3 days in the ground, 2 weeks since the fever took him." Dawn's voice remained steady, though her hands, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders, betrayed her emotion. "I'm sorry, madam, that's mighty fresh grief to bear." Dawn didn't respond but moved toward the lean-to where a small cook fire had been built. "I can offer you beans and coffee, Mr. Zachary, not much else until I go into town for supplies." "That's more than enough," he replied, tending to his horse before joining her. "And Nicholas is fine, madam." "Or Nick, if you prefer." They ate in relative silence as darkness fell, the chill of the mountain night settling around them. Dawn explained that she'd been staying with the minister's wife in town until yesterday, when she'd decided it was time to face the homestead alone. Nicholas listened, offering little about himself beyond the fact that he'd been working cattle drives for the past 5 years and had done construction work before that. As they finished their meal, Dawn gestured to the lean-to. "You can sleep here tonight. I'll take the wagon and the canvas." Nicholas shook his head. "That won't do, madam. You keep your space. I've got my bedroll and have slept under the stars plenty of times." "There's rain coming," she warned, looking at the clouding sky. "You can feel it in the air." "All the more reason you should have the shelter," he insisted. Dawn studied him in the dying firelight, this stranger who had appeared at her most vulnerable moment. In another time, another place, she might have been frightened of a man like Nicholas Zachary, with his quiet intensity and weather-beaten face that revealed little. But grief had a way of stripping away ordinary fears, leaving only the raw need to survive. "Very well," she finally conceded, "but tomorrow we discuss what needs doing and what compensation would be fair." Nicholas nodded his agreement. "First light, then." That night, as promised, the rain came, a gentle spring shower that whispered secrets to the pines and reminded Dawn of all the leaks in her makeshift shelter. She lay awake, listening to the rhythmic pattering on the canvas, wondering if the stranger had found adequate shelter or if he was getting soaked under his blanket. She wondered, too, what William would think of her allowing a drifter to stay on their land. "It's just temporary," she whispered, as if her husband could hear. "Just until I figure things out." By dawn, the rain had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. Dawn emerged from the lean-to find Nicholas already up, examining the roof structure with critical eyes. He'd built a small fire and had coffee brewing. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Thought you might appreciate a cup after the rain." "Thank you," she replied, accepting the tin cup he offered. "Did you stay dry?" A slight smile crossed his face. "Dry enough." "Your husband picked a good spot for the house. Land drains well." They discussed the work ahead over breakfast. Nicholas explained what would be needed to complete the roof properly before the summer thunderstorm season began in earnest. "I noticed pine stands about half a mile east," he said. "Good straight trees for beams and shingles. Got an axe," Dawn nodded. "William's tools are all here. He'd collected everything needed." She hesitated. "Mr. Zachary, Nicholas," he corrected gently. "Nicholas," she amended. "I still don't know what I can offer in payment." "I have a little saved," but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Let's make a deal. I'll finish your roof and build a small barn for my horse and your wagon. In exchange, I get meals and a place to sleep for the duration. When I'm done, we'll call it square." Dawn considered his offer. It seemed too generous, making her suspicious of his motives. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "My pa used to say a man's measure is taken by what he does when no one's watching, and what he gives when he has little to spare." He turned back to her. "I've been on my own a long time, Mrs. Anderson. Sometimes a man needs to remember he's part of something bigger than himself." There was truth in his words, Dawn could sense it. Still, caution prevailed. I accept your offer, but I'll need to let Sheriff Miller know you're working here, for propriety's sake. Nicholas nodded. That's wise. I'll ride into town with you when you're ready. The trip into Salida that morning marked the beginning of a cautious alliance. Sheriff Miller, a grizzled veteran of the Union Army, took Nicholas's measure with narrowed eyes but offered no objection to the arrangement, particularly after the minister's wife, Mrs. Tate, voiced her approval of anything that would help the young widow. God works in mysterious ways, Mrs. Tate declared, patting Dawn's hand. Perhaps he sent Mr. Zachary to help in your time of need. Dawn purchased supplies with her dwindling funds: flour, coffee, salt pork, and ammunition for the rifle William had taught her to shoot. Nicholas bought nails and a few tools he would need, paying from his own meager savings. The townsfolk watched with curious eyes as they loaded the wagon, whispers following in their wake. Folks will talk, Nicholas observed quietly as they left town. Small towns always do. Let them, Dawn replied, her chin lifted with defiance. I have nothing to be ashamed of. The work began that afternoon. Nicholas felled 3 pines, trimmed them, and dragged the logs back to the homestead using his horse. He worked methodically, measuring twice, cutting once, as Dawn's father had always advised. Dawn watched from where she was hanging laundry, struck by the easy competence in his movements. By sundown, he had the main support beam in place. It was honest progress, the first Dawn had seen on the homestead since William had taken ill. That night they ate a simple meal outside under the stars, the conversation less strained than the night before. Where did you learn carpentry? Dawn asked as they finished eating. My father was a shipbuilder in Boston, Nicholas replied. I apprenticed under him until I was 17. How does a shipbuilder's son end up a cowboy in Colorado territory? A shadow passed over his features. War has a way of changing a man's path. After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to the life I'd known. Dawn nodded, understanding more than she let on. William, too, had been changed by the war, though he'd spoken of it rarely. My husband served with the 2nd Colorado Cavalry. Good outfit, Nicholas commented. Fought brave. Yes, she agreed softly. He was a good man, gentle despite what he'd seen. She looked away, blinking back unexpected tears. Forgive me, it's still very raw. No need for forgiveness, Mrs. Anderson. Grief has its own time. They fell silent then, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Eventually, Dawn retired to her lean-to, and Nicholas to his bedroll beneath the half-finished roof, each lost in private thoughts about pasts they couldn't change and futures they couldn't predict. The next week fell into a rhythm. Nicholas rose before dawn each day, working on the roof while the day was cool. Dawn tended her small garden, prepared meals, and rode into town twice more for supplies. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, the silence between them gradually becoming comfortable rather than strained. On the 7th day, Nicholas announced that the roof was nearly completed. Just need to finish the chimney stonework and seal it proper, he explained over supper. Then we can move your things inside where they belong. Dawn looked up at the solid pine roof, now fully shingled and weather-tight. In just a week, this stranger had transformed her desperate situation into something approaching security. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly. No thanks needed, Nicholas replied, his usual response whenever she expressed gratitude, just fulfilling our agreement. That night, Dawn lay awake longer than usual, listening to the gentle sounds of the Colorado night. Nicholas Zachary puzzled her. He worked tirelessly, spoke little of himself, and seemed to want nothing beyond the simplest necessities. Men in her experience always wanted something: land, money, position, or a woman's affections. Yet Nicholas appeared content with meals and a place to lay his head. The following morning, Dawn rode to William's grave while Nicholas worked on the chimney. It had become her Sunday ritual, these quiet moments with the husband she had loved since they were both 16, courting in Kansas City before the war tore the nation apart. He's nearly finished the roof, William, she said softly, arranging wildflowers on the fresh grave. A stranger, helping your widow out of simple kindness. She traced her fingers over his name carved into the wooden cross. I miss you terribly. I'm trying to be strong like you always said I was. A movement caught her eye. Sheriff Miller approaching on horseback. He dismounted with a respectful nod. Mrs. Anderson, thought I might find you here. Sheriff, she greeted him. Is something wrong? He adjusted his hat, looking uncomfortable. Not wrong exactly, just thought you should know I sent a telegraph about your Mr. Zachary. Standard procedure for strangers in my town, Dawn stiffened. And? Nothing bad, he's who he says. Served with the 20th Massachusetts Infantry during the war, honorable discharge after being wounded at Gettysburg. The sheriff paused. But folks are talking, Dawn. A young widow living alone with a drifter, he's finishing what William started, she interrupted, her voice tight. Nothing improper has occurred. Sheriff Miller raised his hands placatingly. I know that, just passing along what's being said, Mrs. Tate suggested it might be proper for Mr. Zachary to take a room in town now that the roof's nearly done. Dawn felt a flash of indignation. The roof may be nearly done, but there's the barn yet to build and winter preparations to make. I won't send away honest help because of idle gossip. The sheriff sighed. You always were stubborn, even as a girl. Your pa warned William about that. Despite herself, Dawn smiled slightly. Her father and the sheriff had been friends back in Kansas before her family moved to Colorado. He knew what he was getting. That he did. Sheriff Miller mounted his horse again. Just be careful, Dawn. A woman alone has to guard her reputation as well as her property out here. After he rode away, Dawn remained by the grave, troubled by the conversation. She hadn't considered how Nicholas's presence might affect her standing in the community. Salida was still a small town, and though growing rapidly with the coming railroad, it maintained frontier sensibilities about propriety. When she returned to the homestead, she found Nicholas on the roof, setting the final stones of the chimney. He looked up as her wagon approached, raising a hand in greeting. Something in that simple gesture, the sight of a man working on her home, waiting for her return, caused an unexpected tightness in her chest. It's finished, he called down as she climbed from the wagon. Want to see inside? Dawn followed him through the door William had hung just before falling ill. The interior was simple, one large room with a stone fireplace at one end, rough-hewn floors, and 2 windows that let in the afternoon light. But the roof above was solid and complete, promising shelter from rain, snow, and sun. It's wonderful, she breathed, turning in a slow circle. William would be pleased, Nicholas nodded, a rare smile softening his features. He laid a good foundation, made my work easier. Sheriff Miller came to see me at the cemetery, Dawn said, deciding directness was best. He mentioned that people in town are talking about our arrangement. The smile faded from Nicholas's face. I suspected they might. Small towns have long memories and longer tongues. He suggested you might take a room in town. Nicholas studied her face carefully. And what do you think, Mrs. Anderson? Dawn met his gaze steadily. I think there's still a barn to build, as we agreed. And I think I'm too practical to care about gossip when there's work to be done before winter. Something passed between them in that moment, an unspoken understanding, perhaps, or the first fragile threads of trust being woven. Nicholas nodded once. Then we'll continue as planned. I'll sleep in the lean-to, give you privacy in your home. Thank you, she said simply. That night, Dawn slept under her own roof for the first time. The house still needed much furniture beyond the bed and table William had built, proper curtains for the windows, shelving for storage. But it was a home now, not merely the shell of one, and that night she slept more soundly than she had since William first showed signs of fever. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June day that made the hardships of frontier life seem worthwhile. Dawn rose early, determined to begin organizing her new home. She found Nicholas already at work, marking out the dimensions for a small barn behind the house. "Good morning," she called, carrying coffee out to him. "You're making an early start." Best time to work, he replied, accepting the cup gratefully. How did you sleep? Well, very well. She looked back at the cabin, pride evident in her expression. It feels like a home now. Nicholas nodded, sipping his coffee. It's a good feeling, having a roof over your head that you can call your own. There was something in his tone that suggested personal knowledge of what it meant to be without such security. Dawn hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since their first meeting. Where will you go when you're finished here? He shrugged, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains. Hadn't given it much thought. There's usually ranch work to be had or mining, the railroad's always hiring. You don't have a place you call home. Not for a long time, he admitted. Not since before the war. Dawn wanted to ask more but sensed his reluctance to elaborate. Instead, she changed the subject. I need to go into town today. The general store just got in fabric for curtains, according to Mrs. Tate. Nicholas nodded. I'll continue here. Should have the barn framing up by sundown. The trip to Salida that day proved enlightening in ways Dawn hadn't anticipated. The whispers and sidelong glances from townsfolk confirmed Sheriff Miller's warning about gossip. At the general store, Mrs. Holcomb, the proprietor's wife, was particularly pointed in her comments. I hear your handyman is making himself quite at home, she remarked as she cut fabric for Dawn's curtains. Such a blessing to find help so soon after poor William's passing. The implication was clear, and Dawn felt her cheeks flush with anger. Mr. Zachary has been nothing but respectful and hardworking, she replied stiffly. I don't know what I would have done without his assistance. Oh, I'm sure, Mrs. Holcomb said with false sympathy. A young widow needs protection, after all, though most would wait a proper mourning period before seeking male companionship. Dawn placed her coins on the counter with deliberate care. Mr. Zachary is completing work my husband began, Mrs. Holcomb. There is nothing improper in our arrangement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other errands to attend to. As she left the store, Dawn nearly collided with Delia Thompson, the schoolteacher who had arrived in Salida just months before Dawn and William. Unlike most of the townspeople, Delia smiled warmly. Don't mind Constance Holcomb, she said, falling into step beside Dawn. She's been the self-appointed guardian of town morals since she arrived, and that was before there was even a proper town. Dawn sighed. I expected some talk, but not such open hostility. People fear what they don't understand, Delia replied. And a woman making her own way without a husband is something many here don't understand. She touched Dawn's arm lightly. If you need anything, help, company, or just someone to talk to who won't judge, my door is always open. The unexpected kindness brought tears to Dawn's eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. Back at the homestead, Dawn found Nicholas true to his word. The barn's framework stood outlined against the afternoon sky, the skeleton of what would become shelter for her wagon and his horse. He worked shirtless in the summer heat, his back bearing the marks of old scars that spoke of hard living and perhaps the wounds Sheriff Miller had mentioned. She paused, watching him work for a moment before announcing her presence. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, the way he moved with purpose and precision. In the week and a half he'd been at the homestead, she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his hammer, to his deep voice offering simple observations about the weather or the land. Looks like it's taking shape, she called, approaching with supplies from town. Nicholas turned, reaching for his shirt draped over a nearby post. Coming along, he agreed, pulling the garment over his head. Should be done in another week, weather permitting. Dawn nodded, feeling strangely disappointed at the timeline. Once the barn was complete, their agreement would be fulfilled and Nicholas would move on. The thought left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. I brought supplies, she said, gesturing to the wagon, and some apple pie from the bakery. Thought you might appreciate something sweet after working all day. His eyes lit up at the mention of pie. That's mighty kind, Mrs. Anderson. Dawn, she said suddenly. If I'm to call you Nicholas, you should call me Dawn. Mrs. Anderson makes me feel like my mother-in-law. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Dawn it is, then." That evening they shared the pie sitting on the porch steps Nicholas had added to the cabin. The sunset painted the Colorado sky in shades of orange and purple, the distant peaks of the Collegiate Range standing sentinel over the valley. "It's beautiful here," Nicholas observed, scraping the last of the pie from his plate. "Your husband chose well." "He wanted to build something lasting," Dawn replied, her gaze on the mountains, "something to pass on to our children someday." She fell silent, the familiar ache of lost dreams washing over her. Nicholas set his plate aside. "You're young yet." "There's still time for children if that's what you want." Dawn glanced at him, surprised by the personal nature of his comment. "Perhaps, but out here a woman needs a husband to survive, let alone raise children," she sighed. "I'm not sure I could love again after William." "The heart has capacity we don't always recognize," Nicholas said quietly. Then, as if embarrassed by his philosophical turn, he stood and gathered their plates. "I'll wash these before turning in." Dawn watched him walk to the water barrel, struck by the contradictions in this man. He could go days speaking only of practical matters wood needed, nails running low, weather patterns suggesting rain, then suddenly offer an insight that revealed depths she hadn't suspected. As the days passed and June gave way to July, the barn took shape under Nicholas's skilled hands. Dawn found herself inventing reasons to be outside watching him work, offering water or coffee, asking questions about his progress. In the evenings, their conversations gradually lengthened, with Nicholas slowly revealing pieces of his past. She learned that he had lost both parents before the war, his mother to consumption, his father to a shipyard accident. He had enlisted at 19, fought through some of the bloodiest battles of the conflict, and taken a bullet at Gettysburg that had nearly claimed his life. After recovering, he had drifted west, working wherever he could find employment. "Never stayed in one place too long," he admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. "Never seemed much point. No one waiting for you anywhere." Dawn asked, then immediately regretted the question when she saw the shadow cross his face. "There was someone once. Elizabeth?" He stared into the flames. "We were to marry after the war. She couldn't wait." He shrugged, as if dismissing an old pain. "Can't blame her." The man who came back wasn't the one she'd promised to marry. Dawn understood then, or thought she did, why Nicholas Zachary had become a drifter, why he carried himself with such solitary purpose. The war had taken more than blood from him. It had taken his future, his sense of belonging. "I'm sorry," she said simply. He nodded once, acknowledgement of her sympathy without inviting more. "What about you? How did you and William meet?" Dawn smiled at the memory. "We grew up together in Kansas City. His family lived 3 doors down from mine. He pulled my braids when we were children, then asked to court me when we turned 16. Her smile faded. "The war came a year later. He joined up with the Kansas Volunteers before transferring to the Colorado Cavalry. We wrote letters for 3 years, married when he came home in 65. "And came west for a fresh start," Nicholas guessed. Yes, William had seen Colorado during the war and fell in love with these mountains, said a man could breathe free here. She looked around at the homestead, at all they had accomplished in just a few weeks. He was right about that. The following Sunday, Nicholas surprised Dawn by offering to accompany her to William's grave. It was a gesture she hadn't expected but appreciated deeply. They rode together in her wagon, the summer heat tempered by a gentle breeze off the mountains. At the cemetery, Nicholas stood back respectfully as Dawn arranged fresh wildflowers on the grave and spoke softly to her husband. When she had finished, he stepped forward and placed a small wooden carving beside her flowers, a perfect miniature of the cabin he had roofed. "Thought he might like to see what his home looks like now," Nicholas explained, a touch of embarrassment in his voice. "Carved it last night." Dawn stared at the tiny replica, touched beyond words by the gesture. The detail was exquisite, right down to the chimney stones and porch steps. "It's beautiful," she managed finally. "Thank you." On the ride back to the homestead, Dawn studied Nicholas's profile against the backdrop of blue sky and distant peaks. In the 3 weeks since he had found her weeping at this same grave, he had transformed not only her homestead, but also her sense of possibility. For the first time since William's death, she could imagine a future on this land. "Nicholas," she said as they approached the cabin, "what will you do when the barn is finished?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Move on, I expect. That was our agreement." "Agreements can be amended," she suggested carefully. "There's more work to be done here than I can manage alone. Fencing, plowing for next year's crops, cutting firewood for winter." Nicholas glanced at her, his expression guarded. "What are you proposing exactly?" Dawn took a deep breath. "Stay through the winter as my hired hand. I can offer room and board and a small wage once I sell some of this year's vegetables in town." He was silent for so long that Dawn feared she had offended him somehow. Finally, he spoke. "People in town are already talking." "If I stay longer, your reputation, my reputation is my concern," she interrupted firmly. "I need help, Nicholas. You need work and a place to winter. It seems a sensible arrangement to me." The wagon rolled to a stop before her cabin. Nicholas set the brake and turned to face her fully. "Are you certain this is what you want?" There was something in his tone, in the intensity of his gaze, that made Dawn wonder if he was asking about more than just employment. She met his eyes steadily. "I am," a slow nod, a decision reached. "Then I accept your offer, Dawn. I'll stay through winter." The relief that flooded through her was more profound than she had anticipated, confirming what she had begun to suspect but hadn't fully acknowledged. Nicholas Zachary's presence had become important to her in ways that went beyond practical assistance. As July progressed into August, the barn was completed and work began on fencing the property. Dawn's small garden yielded a bountiful harvest, enough to sell vegetables in town and preserve plenty for the coming winter. Nicholas built shelving inside the cabin, a proper chair to accompany the table William had made, and a storage shed for tools. Their days fell into a comfortable routine. They rose with the sun, worked through the cool morning hours, rested during the hottest part of the day, then resumed work until sunset. Evenings were spent on the porch, talking or simply sitting in companionable silence as darkness claimed the valley. Dawn was keenly aware that the gossip in town had not abated. If anything, it had intensified when it became known that Nicholas would be staying on as her hired hand. She found herself caring less with each passing day. The opinion of people like Constance Holcomb seemed insignificant compared to the progress they were making on the homestead, and the growing ease she felt in Nicholas's company. It was Delia Thompson who finally broached the subject directly, visiting the homestead one Saturday afternoon in late August. The schoolteacher arrived unannounced, ostensibly to deliver books she thought Dawn might enjoy, but her true purpose became clear once they were alone inside the cabin. "You should know what they're saying in town," Delia said, accepting a cup of coffee. "That you and Mr. Zachary are," she hesitated delicately, "living in sin," Dawn supplied, more amused than offended. "Yes, I've gathered as much from the looks I receive at church and in the general store." Delia studied her friend carefully. "Does it bother you?" Dawn considered the question honestly. "Less than it probably should. Nicholas sleeps in the barn. We maintain all proper boundaries. What others choose to believe is beyond my control." "And how do you feel about him?" Delia asked directly. "Because anyone with eyes can see how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." The observation sent a jolt through Dawn. "What do you mean?" Delia smiled gently. "He cares for you, Dawn, deeply I suspect. The question is, do you return those feelings?" Dawn set her coffee cup down with unsteady hands. "William has been gone barely 4 months. It would be disrespectful to his memory." "William loved you," Delia interrupted softly. "Do you think he would want you to mourn forever, to deny yourself companionship and possibly happiness?" The question lingered in Dawn's mind long after Delia had departed. That evening, she watched Nicholas more closely as he worked on mending a harness, noting the careful precision of his hands, the occasional glances he cast in her direction. Was Delia right? Did he harbor feelings beyond friendship and employment? More importantly, what did she feel for this man who had appeared in her life at its lowest point and quietly, steadily helped rebuild not just her home but her sense of future? The answer came unexpectedly the following week when Nicholas fell ill. It began with a cough that he dismissed as dust from the haying they had been doing. By nightfall, he was burning with fever, his breathing labored. Dawn helped him to the cabin, insisting he take her bed while she sent for the doctor. Dr. Harrison arrived just before midnight, examining Nicholas with grave concern. Pneumonia, most likely, he diagnosed. Has he been working in the rain? We both were, 2 days ago, Dawn admitted. A sudden storm caught us bringing in hay, the doctor nodded. Keep him warm, plenty of fluids. I'll leave medicine for the fever and cough. The next 48 hours will tell. He packed his bag and gave Dawn a searching look. You're fond of him. It wasn't a question, but Dawn answered anyway. He saved me in a way. When William died, I thought I might have to abandon the homestead. Nicholas made it possible for me to stay. Just be careful, Mrs. Anderson. The heart doesn't always choose convenient times to heal and open again. With that cryptic advice, the doctor departed, leaving Dawn to tend to her patient. For 2 days and nights, Nicholas's fever raged. Dawn barely slept, applying cold compresses, coaxing water and broth between his cracked lips, whispering encouragement when delirium took him. In his fever dreams, he called for people Dawn didn't know, his parents, comrades from the war, and once, heartbreakingly, for Elizabeth. It was during those long vigils, listening to his labored breathing in the lamplight, that Dawn confronted the truth she had been avoiding. She cared for Nicholas Zachary not just as a friend or employee, but as a woman cares for a man. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. On the 3rd morning, his fever broke. Dawn had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed and woke to find Nicholas watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. You stayed, he said, his voice rough from coughing. Of course I stayed, she replied, reaching for the water cup. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo. He accepted the water gratefully. You shouldn't have given up your bed, Dawn smiled tiredly. You needed it more than I did. His hand caught hers as she took the empty cup. Thank you, Dawn, for everything. The touch of his hand, the intensity in his eyes, something shifted between them in that moment. Dawn felt it as surely as she had felt the change in the air before the storm that had soaked them in the hayfield. Rest, she said, gently withdrawing her hand. You have a lot of recovering to do. Nicholas's illness forced a change in their living arrangements. Too weak to return to the barn for nearly a week, he remained in Dawn's bed while she slept on a pallet by the fireplace. The impropriety of the situation would have scandalized Salida society, but Dawn found she cared even less now about such judgments. As September painted the aspen groves gold and orange, Nicholas regained his strength. Dawn insisted he ease back into work gradually, taking on the heavier tasks herself despite his protests. They settled into a new rhythm, their conversations deeper, the silences between them charged with unspoken awareness. It was during this time that Dawn received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Reynolds, a rancher from the next valley who had called on her twice since William's death, rode up to the homestead one afternoon while Nicholas was repairing fencing in the south pasture. Mrs. Anderson, Reynolds greeted her, removing his hat. You're looking well. Mr. Reynolds, Dawn acknowledged, wiping her hands on her apron. What brings you out this way? Reynolds dismounted, his gaze taking in the improvements to the homestead, the completed roof, the new barn, the fenced garden. I see you've been busy, hired help, I understand. Mr. Zachary has been invaluable, Dawn confirmed, keeping her tone neutral. Reynolds was a good man by all accounts, prosperous and respected. William had done business with him occasionally, trading carpentry work for beef. That's actually why I've come, Reynolds said, his expression serious. There's been talk in town, concern for your reputation, Dawn sighed. Mr. Reynolds, Thomas, please. Thomas, she amended. I appreciate concern for my welfare, but I assure you everything is quite proper here. He stepped closer. Dawn, I respected your husband. He was a fine craftsman and an honest man. I'd like to think he would approve of someone looking out for his widow's interests. He cleared his throat. Which is why I've come to make you an offer. Dawn tensed, suspecting what was coming. I have a good ranch, as you know. 400 acres, cattle, horses, a fine house, no children yet, but I hope for a family. Reynolds met her eyes directly. I'm proposing marriage, Dawn, security for you, respectability, and perhaps in time, affection. I believe we could suit very well. The offer was logical, practical, exactly what a frontier widow should hope for. Yet Dawn felt no flutter of interest, no spark of possibility. I'm honored by your proposal, Thomas, truly, but I'm not ready to consider remarriage. Reynolds frowned slightly. Is it the cowboy? Because folks are saying, what folks say is no concern of mine, Dawn interrupted firmly. Mr. Zachary is my employee and friend, nothing more. Even as she spoke the words, Dawn recognized the lie in them. Nicholas had become much more than an employee or friend, though she had not put a name to those feelings or acted upon them. Reynolds studied her face, then nodded slowly. I see. Well, the offer remains open should you change your mind. He replaced his hat. Think on it, Dawn. A woman alone faces hard choices in this country. After he departed, Dawn stood motionless on the porch, considering his words. A woman alone indeed faced hard choices, but she was no longer certain she was alone, or that marriage to a man she didn't love was the only path available to her. Nicholas returned at dusk, tired from a day of fence mending. He found Dawn sitting on the porch steps, lost in thought. Everything all right? He asked, settling beside her. Saw Reynolds riding away earlier. Dawn glanced at him. You know Thomas Reynolds? Know of him. Worked cattle on a neighboring ranch last spring. Nicholas stretched his long legs. Good cattleman by all accounts, decent employer. Dawn nodded. He proposed marriage today. The stillness that came over Nicholas was absolute. Even his breathing seemed to pause. I see, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. A good match. He can offer security, position in the community. Yes, Dawn agreed. All very sensible considerations. And what did you tell him? Nicholas asked, still not looking at her. Dawn turned to study his profile in the fading light. I told him I wasn't ready to consider remarriage. Nicholas exhaled slowly. Is that the truth, or were you being kind? It's part of the truth, she admitted. The other part is that I couldn't marry a man I don't love, no matter how sensible the arrangement might be. Now he did look at her, his eyes searching her face. And do you think you could love again, after William? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning that went far beyond the words themselves. Dawn thought of William, of the life they had planned together, of the dreams cut short by his untimely death. She thought of the grief that had nearly consumed her, the despair that had brought her to her knees at his grave. And then she thought of Nicholas, finding her in that moment of absolute vulnerability, offering not pity but practical help. Building her roof, her barn, shelves for her home. Working beside her day after day, respecting her independence while providing the support she needed. Becoming, without either of them quite realizing it, essential to her happiness. I already do, she said softly. The words hung in the autumn twilight. Nicholas went very still, his eyes never leaving her face. Dawn, he began, his voice rough with emotion. You don't need to say anything, she assured him quickly. I'm not expecting. Her words were cut off as Nicholas leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, questioning touch that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her body. When he pulled back, his expression was a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. But I didn't think it was right with you still grieving. And I'm just a drifter with nothing to offer except my hands and my word. Dawn reached out, touching his face gently. Your hands built me a roof when I had none. Your word has been unfailingly kept. What more could I ask of any man? Nicholas caught her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm. I love you, Dawn Anderson. I think I have since that first day at the cemetery, though I didn't recognize it then, but I won't stand between you and a good future. Reynolds can give you things I can't. Thomas Reynolds can't give me what I want, Dawn replied simply. You already have. Their second kiss was deeper, more certain, a promise exchanged without words. When they finally parted, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers. What happens now? Dawn smiled. Now we finish preparing for winter. Together, the rest will sort itself out. As September gave way to October and the first snows dusted the highest peaks, Dawn and Nicholas settled into their new understanding. Nothing changed outwardly. Nicholas still slept in the barn. They still worked side by side during daylight hours, but everything had changed between them. Touches lingered. Smiles came more readily, and the future no longer loomed as an uncertain prospect, but as a path they would walk together. The town's gossip intensified when Dawn and Nicholas began attending church services together, sitting side by side in a pew near the back. Dawn held her head high, ignoring the whispers. Nicholas endured the scrutiny with stoic dignity, his hand occasionally finding hers when the murmurs grew particularly loud. It was after one such service, as they were leaving the church, that Constance Holcomb made her most direct attack yet. Mrs. Anderson, she called, loud enough for everyone in the churchyard to hear. I wonder if you realize what example you're setting for the young women of Salida. A widow entertaining a drifter barely 4 months after her husband's passing, that's enough, Constance. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his expression stern. Mrs. Anderson's arrangements are her own business. When they affect the moral fabric of our community, they become everyone's business, Mrs. Holcomb insisted. What would poor William think if he could see? If William could see, Dawn interrupted, her voice clear and steady. He would thank Nicholas Zachary for completing the roof he started, for building the barn he planned, and for helping his widow maintain the homestead he loved. She stepped closer to the older woman. My husband was a good man who would judge others by their actions, not by gossip and innuendo. A murmur ran through the gathered townsfolk. Mrs. Holcomb's face flushed with indignation. Well, no, you never have, Constance, Delia Thompson interjected, coming to stand beside Dawn. You've never known what it's like to face this frontier alone, to make hard choices and do whatever is necessary to survive. Perhaps you should withhold judgment until you've walked in another's shoes. With that, Delia linked her arm through Dawn's and led her away, Nicholas following a step behind. Once they were clear of the crowd, Delia squeezed Dawn's arm. I've wanted to say something like that to Constance Holcomb for months. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Dawn laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. Thank you for your support, both of you, she added, glancing back at Nicholas. He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. You didn't need my help. You handled that beautifully. The confrontation marked a turning point. While not everyone in Salida approved of their situation, the most vocal criticism faded. Sheriff Miller made a point of stopping by the homestead occasionally, his presence a quiet statement of support. Delia Thompson became a regular visitor, bringing books and news from town. As October progressed and the days grew shorter, Nicholas and Dawn began discussing their future more concretely. Sitting by the fire one evening, Nicholas broached the subject that had been on both their minds. Winter's coming, he observed, watching the flames dance. Soon the passes will be snowbound until spring, Dawn nodded, continuing her mending. We're well prepared thanks to your hard work. Plenty of firewood, food stored, the cabin is warm. Nicholas was quiet for a moment. Dawn, I need to ask you something important. She set aside her sewing, giving him her full attention. Yes, when spring comes, I want to ride to Denver. He met her eyes directly. To file homestead papers for the adjacent parcel to the west, build my own place. He took a deep breath. And then, if you'll have me, to marry you properly. Joy bloomed in Dawn's chest, but caution tempered her response. Nicholas, are you certain? You've been a drifter so long. Would settling in one place make you happy? He moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. I've been searching for something without knowing what it was, Dawn. Moving from place to place, never putting down roots, now I know I was looking for home, for someone to build a life with. His voice softened. I found that with you. Tears pricked Dawn's eyes. William will always be part of me, she warned, part of this land. As he should be, Nicholas agreed. He loved you first and well, I would never ask you to forget that. Dawn freed one hand to touch his face gently. Then yes, Nicholas Zachary, when spring comes, ride to Denver, file your claim, and when you return I will marry you with a glad heart. The kiss they shared sealed the promise, a commitment to a future neither had imagined when he first found her weeping over William's grave. That winter proved to be one of the harshest in Colorado's memory. Snow piled deep around the cabin, winds howled down from the mountain passes, and temperatures plunged well below zero for weeks at a time. Yet inside the snug cabin with its solid roof and well-built chimney, Dawn and Nicholas found warmth and contentment. Nicholas moved into the cabin as December's blizzards made the trek to and from the barn treacherous. He slept on a pallet near the fireplace, maintaining propriety despite their engagement. They passed the long winter evenings reading aloud from Dawn's small collection of books, playing chess on a board Nicholas carved, and planning for spring planting. Christmas was celebrated simply but joyfully. Nicholas presented Dawn with a cedar chest he had been secretly building in the barn during the autumn months. Dawn gave him a new hat and a journal bound in leather, inscribed with his initials. For recording our new beginnings, she explained as he ran his fingers over the fine leather. New Year's Day 1873 dawned clear and bitterly cold. After breakfast, Nicholas surprised Dawn by suggesting they bundle up and walk to William's grave. Are you certain? She asked, concerned about his motivations. It's freezing out there. Nicholas nodded. There's something I need to do, something I should have done months ago. They trudged through knee-deep snow to the cemetery on the hill overlooking Salida. William's grave was covered in a smooth blanket of white, the wooden cross just visible above the drifts. Dawn brushed snow from the marker while Nicholas stood a few paces back. Hat in hand despite the cold when she had finished, he stepped forward to stand beside her. William Anderson, he began, his voice soft but clear in the winter stillness. I never knew you in life, but I've come to know you through the home you began and the woman you loved. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I found her weeping at your grave last spring. I helped her finish your roof, and somewhere along the way I came to love her as you did. Dawn's eyes filled with tears as Nicholas continued. I'm asking for your blessing, William. I promise to care for her, to respect her memories of you, and to finish the work you started on this land. 2 homesteads side by side, building something lasting in this valley. The only response was the soft whisper of wind through the pines, but Dawn felt a sense of peace settle over her. William would have approved, she knew. He had always been practical, always wanted her happiness above all else. Thank you, she said simply, taking Nicholas's hand in hers. That meant everything. By March, the worst of winter had passed. The snow began to recede, revealing patches of earth eager for spring's touch. Nicholas prepared for his journey to Denver, planning to be gone no more than 3 weeks. The parcel he intended to claim had been surveyed the previous year, but never filed upon. 20 acres adjacent to Dawn's land with good water and promising soil. The night before his departure, they sat before the fire, reluctant to part even for a short time after the closeness of winter. When you return, Dawn said, we should set a wedding date. Perhaps May when the wildflowers are blooming. Nicholas nodded, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. May it is. A small ceremony here at the homestead. With Delia as my witness and Sheriff Miller standing up for you, Dawn agreed. Nothing elaborate, just a declaration of what we already know to be true. The following morning dawned clear, promising good traveling weather. Dawn stood on the porch, watching as Nicholas saddled his paint horse and secured his provisions. 3 weeks, he promised, pulling her into an embrace. Then home to stay. Be careful, she urged. The passes can still be treacherous this time of year. He kissed her, a lingering promise of return. I survived Gettysburg, Dawn. I think I can handle a Colorado spring. With a final smile, he mounted and rode away, turning once to wave before the trail curved out of sight. The 3 weeks of separation passed slowly for Dawn, despite the increasing demands of spring preparations. She plowed the garden plot, planted early vegetables, repaired winter damage to the fences, and began cleaning and organizing for their upcoming marriage. Delia Thompson visited often, helping with wedding preparations and providing welcome company. It was during one such visit, as they discussed wedding plans over tea, that Delia broached a delicate subject. Have you thought about changing the name on the homestead papers after you're married? She asked. Legally, it might be wise to have Nicholas's name on the deed as well. Dawn considered the question. I hadn't thought of it, honestly. The land was William's dream originally, his claim under the Homestead Act. And now it will be part of a new dream with Nicholas, Delia observed gently. Not replacing the old, but building upon it, Dawn nodded slowly. Yes, you're right. We'll speak to the land office when Nicholas returns. Do things properly. The 3 weeks Nicholas had estimated for his journey came and went with no sign of his return. Dawn tried not to worry, knowing that spring travel could be unpredictable. Perhaps he had been delayed in Denver, or the trails were muddier than anticipated. By the 4th week, concern began to gnaw at her. By the 5th, worry had become a constant companion. Sheriff Miller, seeing her distress during a Sunday service, offered to telegraph contacts in Denver to inquire about Nicholas. No need to fear the worst, he assured her. Plenty of reasons. A man might be delayed this time of year. The telegraph reply came 3 days later. Nicholas Zachary had successfully filed his homestead claim on April 3rd and had departed Denver the following morning, expected to arrive in Salida by April 10th at the latest. It was now April 24th. Sheriff Miller organized a search party, focusing on the mountain trails between Denver and Salida. Dawn insisted on joining them, despite objections about the propriety of a woman riding with a group of men. Delia Thompson settled the matter by accompanying her, the 2 women riding side by side as the search began. For 2 days, they found nothing. On the 3rd day, as they searched a narrow pass where spring melt often caused dangerous conditions, they discovered Nicholas's paint horse, grazing alone in a high meadow. The animal was thin but uninjured, its saddle and bridle still in place. He's alive, Dawn insisted, clinging to hope as the men exchanged grim looks. Nicholas wouldn't give up without a fight. We need to keep searching. They combed the area methodically, calling Nicholas's name, searching ravines and thickets where an injured man might seek shelter. It was Sheriff Miller who finally found him halfway down a steep embankment, his leg badly broken and his body weakened by exposure and lack of food. Dawn, he whispered when she scrambled down to reach him, his cracked lips barely able to form the word. Knew you'd find me. The journey back to Salida was slow and careful, Nicholas secured on a makeshift travois pulled by Sheriff Miller's sturdy horse. Dr. Harrison was waiting when they arrived, having been alerted by a rider sent ahead. His diagnosis was serious but not hopeless. A compound fracture of the right leg, exposure, dehydration, and exhaustion. He's a strong man, the doctor told Dawn as Nicholas was settled in her bed, and he has something to live for. Those 2 factors often make the difference between survival and death. For the 2nd time, Dawn found herself tending Nicholas through a health crisis, applying the doctor's treatments, coaxing broth and water between his lips, speaking words of encouragement when pain or fever made him restless. This time, however, she did so not as a reluctant hostess or even a concerned friend, but as a woman fighting for the future she had come to believe in. You promised me May wildflowers, she reminded him during a lucid moment. "Don't think you can escape marrying me by falling down a mountain." A weak smile touched his pale lips. Wouldn't dream of it. Recovery was slow but steady. By mid-May, Nicholas was able to sit up in bed for short periods. By June, he could move about the cabin using crutches the doctor had fashioned. The fracture was healing well, though, Doctor Harrison warned it might always trouble him in cold weather. "A small price," Nicholas declared, watching from the porch as Dawn tended the flourishing garden. "Could have been much worse." Indeed it could have, Dawn reflected. She had nearly lost him, just as she had lost William. The difference was that this time, fate had granted a reprieve, a second chance at happiness she had once thought impossible. They were married on the 1st day of July, 1873, almost exactly 1 year after Nicholas had found Dawn weeping at William's grave. The ceremony took place on the porch of the homestead, with Reverend Tate officiating, Delia Thompson standing up for Dawn, and Sheriff Miller supporting Nicholas, who stood without crutches for the first time since his accident. "I take you, Dawn Anderson, to be my wife," Nicholas vowed, his voice steady despite the effort of standing. "To cherish and protect, to work beside and dream alongside for all the days of our life together." Dawn, radiant in a simple blue dress Delia had helped her make, replied with equal conviction. "I take you, Nicholas Zachary, to be my husband, to support and cherish, to build with and hope beside for all our days together." Simple gold bands were exchanged, a modest wedding supper shared with their small circle of friends, and by sunset, Mr. and Mrs. Zachary were alone in the cabin that had once been just Dawn's but was now truly theirs. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife for the first time, Dawn whispered, "Do you ever think about how unlikely our meeting was? If you hadn't been passing by the cemetery that day." Nicholas drew her closer. "I think some meetings are meant to be, however unlikely they seem. Like a roof that needs building, finding a man who knows how to build, or a drifter who needs a home, finding someone who knows how to make one." Over the next year, as Nicholas's leg healed completely and he began work on building their second homestead on the adjacent parcel, Dawn often thought about his words. There was wisdom in them, and truth about the way lives intertwine in unexpected patterns. By the summer of 1874, Nicholas had completed the foundation for their new home and expanded the barn to accommodate more livestock. Dawn's garden had doubled in size, providing enough vegetables to sell regularly in Salida. Their reputation in town had evolved from scandal to respect, as even the most skeptical citizens acknowledged the genuine nature of their partnership. It was in August of that year that Dawn confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She was expecting their first child. Nicholas received the news with joy bordering on reverence, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A son or daughter to inherit these homesteads," he said, wonder in his voice. "To carry forward what we're building here. What William started and we continued," Dawn added softly. "A family legacy in this valley." Nicholas nodded, understanding her need to include William in this moment. "He would be pleased, I think, that life goes on, that the land he loved will nurture a new generation." In April 1875, their son William Nicholas Zachary was born, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. Sheriff Miller, now godfather to the child, declared him a true son of Salida, while Delia Thompson, named godmother, predicted he would have his father's skill and his mother's heart. On the day of little William's christening, Dawn and Nicholas took him to visit his namesake's grave. The wooden cross had been replaced with a proper headstone, a gift from Nicholas to Dawn on their first anniversary. "William," Dawn said softly, holding her son so that his sleepy gaze could take in the peaceful cemetery on the hill. "This is where your first father rests. He dreamed of this land, loved it enough to bring me here. Without him, none of us would be standing in this beautiful place today." Nicholas placed an arm around his wife's shoulders. "And without him, I would never have found you, weeping here that spring day. Never would have built your roof, fallen in love with your strength and determination. Our lives are woven together in ways we couldn't have imagined, Dawn agreed, leaning into his embrace. Past and present grief and joy. As they walked back to their wagon, baby William cradled securely in Dawn's arms, Nicholas paused to look back at the grave on the hillside, then at the thriving homesteads in the valley below the original cabin with its solid roof, and the newer, larger home they now shared as a family. From tears to triumph, he said quietly. That's the story of this land, of us. Dawn nodded, understanding completely what he meant. Their beginning had been rooted in grief, her tears at a graveside, his solitary existence as a man without roots. Yet from that unlikely meeting had grown something neither could have predicted. A love strong enough to heal past wounds, a partnership capable of building not just roofs but lives, and now a family to carry their shared dreams into the future. "This is just the beginning," she said, smiling up at her husband as their son slept peacefully in her arms. "The best chapters are still to be written." As they rode home in the golden afternoon light, the two homesteads stood side by side in the valley below, a testament to perseverance, to second chances, and to the unexpected ways that love could transform loss into hope. The roof that Nicholas had built for a weeping widow had become the foundation for a future neither had dared to imagine, and beneath it, they had found home at last.